Be focusing today on digital online leaders and how to use Altmetric data and our platform to find them. My name is Sarah Ruhi, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Altmetric. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And my email is right here, as well as the web address for altmetric.com. Just a couple housekeeping items. If you have any issues with the audio or with seeing the screen, please do just drop those in the chat box. I'll periodically check those. If you do have questions that you want to address during the Q&A, please feel free to enter those into the questions box during the course of the webinar, and we will address those as when we're finished with the actual content. We'll address those all at the end. So just to sort of overview what we're envisioning for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to focus on just introducing what Altmetric is and our data for folks for whom that might be new. Speaking a bit about the concept of what a digital opinion leader is, and then actually going into the Altmetric platform to use some of the newest functionality we've rolled out to actually do an analysis. And in this case, I've done an analysis of two drugs you're probably familiar with, Pembro and nivolumab. And we'll wrap it up with Q&A. So again, if you have any questions about the content as it goes through, please just enter those in the questions box. All right. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Altmetric, we are sort of the gold standard in providing metrics around engagement with research online anywhere. We fundamentally are a data science company affiliated with the digital science portfolio of companies. Our home office is in London. Our US team is based across the US from the West Coast all the way to DC, which is where I am based. And when we say we track attention to research outputs, we really mean that writ large. So not just peer-reviewed articles, which is of course where most of us, what most of us think of when we think about research, but also clinical trials, Congress, content, data sets, anything discoverable online is trackable, and we work extensively with our life sciences customers around those specific needs. Where you're most likely to see our data, if you're not familiar with it already, is going to be on publisher websites. So all of the major publishers globally license our data as an enhancement to the journal abstract pages on their sites. So it'll look different on different sites. On the top left there, you're looking at JAMA. They have a number of metrics at the top of the screen. Our scores up there. The Lancet has opted for kind of that smaller badge that looks like a little brick with the score. And the New England Journal of Medicine is actually just licensing the data and not using that visual, and you'll find that in their metrics tab. So in terms of the places that you're most likely going to run into this data, all of the biomedical journals that you're reading or publishing in are a good place to start. We are finding that this data is really applicable across sectors, regardless of what your focus is. So in the life sciences sector, we have everything from data analytics teams to publications teams looking at our data, but we're also working closely with anyone funding research and anyone producing research, whether it's an academic institution, a nonprofit. So this is just a tiny snapshot of the folks that we work with. We're known most commonly for our data visualization. So that donut that you might see on publisher sites, this is a screen grab from the metrics page of a journal article in Science. Again, on that abstract tab is typically where you're going to find the donut image. And that's what we're most known for, and I'll explain what that image is and represents in a moment. We're also known for our top 100 sites. So I'm just going to pop out of the presentation here. So every year in November, we launch a site that looks at the 100 highest scoring articles since the last November. And we kick that off every year. And it's become quite a list that folks want to go to see where their research landed, where their institutions landed, and then we provide quite a bit of a meta-analysis about that. So these are the sorts of custom things that we build both publicly and for customers, internally facing or otherwise. And the extent of those custom both reporting and visualizations and analysis really depends on anything that you're looking for as a potential client. Explorer for Institutions is our flagship platform, and that's what we'll be focusing on for the analysis that we're doing today. So the donut, or the Altmetric Badge, this is the visualization that folks associate sort of most often with our data, and it's a very appealing image in the sense that it conveys a lot in a very small amount of space. So the colors correspond to the sources that we track and the behaviors within that source. So if you're cited in a policy document, you'll get a purple swirl. If you are linked to from a blog, you'll get that yellow swirl. And so on and so forth. So these are the 16 main sources that we track. We're very meticulous about choosing a new source and adding it. The newest one that we've added, actually, that's missing on this image is syllabi from the Open Syllabus project. So we don't add new sources often. When we do, it's quite a deliberative process to get there. And again, when you see that circular donut, that's where you are. That's where the color key comes in. It's important to remember, however, most items don't have any data. So in the biomedical space, probably maybe 60 to 65% of items have no score and no colors in the donut. So if you take a look here at this Journal of Oncology practice, you can see that there's a donut on the right that they're using. It's only got a score of 1. That is very, very typical. So while we tend to show these donuts that have many colors and a high score, it's important to remember that just because it doesn't have any engagement, that does not reflect at all on the quality of the research. So the score itself, what does it mean? There is a temptation, obviously, when you're working in the biomedical space to assume higher numbers are better, whatever better means. It's important to remember that this is not a sum. This is actually a weighted, excuse me for 1 second, my dog is barking. Nora! Sorry about that. It's a weighted sum that takes into account all of the different places that the item has been mentioned, and then depending on the number of people that might engage with it, actually increases over time. So the important thing to remember about the score is that it's an indicator that something is happening. It does not mean that the article is good. It also doesn't mean that the engagement is positive, and that's actually really a key thing to remember when looking at this data. And let me know if you are having any issues seeing the screen here. So a bit about the score then. The engagement is transparent, so you can see who is talking about the work on what platform and where. It's very important to look at this context, because when the engagement is negative, it's important to know where that's coming from and what's being said. So these are examples of negative engagement that I've seen over the years while looking at life sciences research and how it's being engaged with. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Just keep in mind that a high score does not mean that the research is good or that the sentiment around it is good. So what kind of items get high scores? Anything that's quote unquote falls into a hot topic, right? So any research, for example, around drug use, health, anything related to sort of everyday conceptions around health, anything related to sort of hot topic issues in the news like healthcare. All of those areas, depending on the field, get a lot of traction. But there's also plenty of items that get very high scores because they have controversial findings, they're found to be fraudulent, or that there was misconduct involved in the research. In this particular case, we're looking at the attention score for an item in the vaccine debate. And as you can see, because we show you every single mention, regardless of what language it's in, we capture the mentions in the language that they're posted in. Certain topics like vaccines get a lot of engagement just by virtue of the fact that it's such a hot button issue. So something that we do to sort of make sure that the data is transparent, and we're the only provider who does this, is we link to 99% of the mentions out there. So you should not only be able to see that someone wrote a news article or posted about you in a blog, you should be able to read it. And that's critical because once you know the who, what, and where, what was said, who said it, what platform did they say it on, why did they say it, was there a trigger, like clinical trial results came out or the ASCO meeting just happened, that's when you can begin to do some of these deeper dives in the medical affairs space around identifying KOLs, working with your MSLs on share of voice, things like that. So an important contextual data set that we provide to ensure that you know what's really going on behind that number. So let's transition then to what a DOL is. And I apologize, the title of this presentation varied a little bit from the original title of the webinar, which we called them digital online influencers. But DOIs is a little confusing when you also think of DOIs in the publication sense. So I opted for DOLs instead, just to put a little bit of space there. And the way we're thinking about digital online leaders is sort of, I don't want to say as opposed to traditional KOLs, but more of a complementary body of researchers, right? So in the traditional paradigm, KOLs fit, a very specific definition. The hope was that they would impact prescribing behaviors. They had some kind of relationship with the company. And they were the folks that you wanted speaking at conferences, publishing, right? Those were your KOLs. These DOLs are a totally different bunch in a lot of ways. And their influence, their power as a community derives from their ability to reach a very broad audience of folks across online platforms that didn't exist as recently as even 5 years ago. So let's dive kind of into what that means. In terms of reach, how many people read their blog? How many people follow them on Twitter? In terms of their resonance, how much of what they produce gets engaged with further? Do they get retweeted? Do their blogs get covered in the news? Do their blogs get tweeted, right? Are they a critical hub in the dissemination chain of a piece of research? And lastly, relevance, how much is their work engaged with at all? How relevant is it to the larger conversations that are happening around the topic of that publication? So one of the first things that's most interesting about these online influencers is that they really represent a much broader swath of stakeholders than the KOLs do. Often they are clinicians, but very often, excuse me, sorry about that. Very often they are also other stakeholders that you may never interface with. Advocates, patient advocacy, anyone doing regulation or policy, journalists, certainly investors, and of course, people researching in the same field in academia are engaging as well. And sometimes even patients. Patients themselves are the ones who are driving some of this engagement. So being able to reach some of these folks is going to be a very different both endeavor and kind of messaging focus than if you were focusing purely on those doctors that are presenting at conferences. One of the things that makes this group interesting is you can see exactly what they're doing. And certainly if you're an MSL and you're going to go engage with one of these folks around whatever their primary area of interest is as related to your therapy or drug, the fact that you can see what they're actually doing is very helpful. And there's a lot of reasons most influencers or DOLs aren't actively pursuing that title, right? They are using the online platforms out there that exist as a means to get information, find a community of fellow patients, asking questions about their condition or a general area. A lot of them are promoting their own healthcare practices. So they're treating Facebook as almost an advertisement for their business. So there's a lot of different reasons people get online. What's fascinating is their footprint. So in this case, I've grabbed a screenshot from the Epilepsy Foundation, so a nonprofit advocacy group, dedicated solely to the welfare of 3 million people with epilepsy in the U.S. Right? Someone in that group, one Richard Knoll, gave a shout out to a particular piece of medical equipment that he said has been critical for him because it alerts folks to if you have an epileptic seizure. It lets them know that that's happening and gets help. And so this drug, this medical device, this watch, is produced by Empatica. And Maybe they asked him to post this. Most likely they didn't. Again, most companies don't have a great handle on this community, but this is a perfect example of somebody who is sharing information with others with shared concerns, because what worked for him might work for others. Now, the question is, these folks out here are many, and some of them overlap with your current KOL sort of stable, but many of them don't. So Dr. Deanna Tai, she's an editor on a major oncology journal. She's a practicing physician. She is involved in associations. It's very likely she actually could fall into both pools, where she has a very strong conference and publication presence, but she also has a very, very strong social media presence. So she's blogging, she's very active on Twitter, and is a kind of a nice hybrid of those two roles. But that's not typical. And for individuals like her, usually the relationship is one-off projects. They're not sustained relationships the way that you have necessarily with a KOL. So if your company is serious about identifying this group, the first thing to do is, start building those relationships in a sustained way. Part of the issue with not being able to do that, right, is it's not clear whose role that would be within a lot of organizations. Does that sit with MSLs? Does that sit in medical affairs at all? How do you not only find these people, but then keep track of them? And there are different reasons for being concerned about even looking for these folks. So the most common one that you hear is, well, I don't want to go online in Facebook looking for a potential DOL in epilepsy and stumble upon an adverse events report. That's really not something that happens very often. It's actually surprising how little adverse events are shared on social media, but those sorts of legal concerns tend to prevent folks from exploring this space at all. So a missed opportunity in that respect. And of course, there's just the question of, well, okay, even if we could get over the legal concerns, how do we even begin to do this, right? That said, there's value in doing this. Especially when you realize that your existing KOL base are not going to find this. The way that we're seeing this influencer group affect things the most is in the case of share of voice. This group can get different sort of segments of the messaging with respect to your therapy out that you probably have you're going to have less luck with on the KOL side because they don't engage online. So Ed Young's a classic example of what you would consider a sort of non-traditional opinion leader, in that, he's a science writer with a big following on Twitter, and then a very high profile position at The Atlantic. So another example of someone whose radar you want to be on. And what do these relationships bring you? I mean, that's a very relevant question given the amount of work it would take to identify them and sort of vet them. I've heard companies and other KOLs throw out everything from clinical trial recruitment. There are huge communities of patients, particularly online, that are talking about how do we find clinical trials. And then there's obviously many companies looking for clinical trial participants that fit, the very stringent requirements for participation. These folks can participate on advisory boards. They can provide feedback on messaging. In many cases, they could be future traditional KOLs. They could be future collaborators on clinical trials or publications. But most critically, they can be conduits to communities that you may not have direct access to now. This example here is from the National Cancer Institute. They have their own blog. And obviously the head of cancer treatment and diagnosis at NCI, if she's talking about a piece of research that you've completed that looks promising, it's going to cause quite a ripple effect to have her say that publicly on the NIH website. So how do we begin to find these folks? They're out there, they're engaging in a very sort of robust way with the communities that they speak to, but sort of how do you start thinking about finding them? Our platform can help, and that is what I'm going to try to show you now. So what you're looking at is the Altmetric Explorer platform. It is at the moment sort of a dummy account, so that's why you see kind of an imaginary university there. But should your organization, pursue this kind of data, it would be personalized to your company or to your biotech. The nice thing about our platform is it tracks everything. So we don't just have everything from Pfizer or everything from Merck. We have everything that's been published that meets the requirements for capturing data. So we have all your competitors in here, peer institutions, researchers, all of their research items that have attention are in here. So using the comprehensive database, not the institutional view, because obviously that's a dummy view, I conducted a number of searches to begin the analysis. I looked at Merck Pembro articles as published, as labeled in PubMed. So within our advanced search, there's a number of different ways to parse the 8 million plus items that we've currently identified as having attention. And certainly in the biomedical space, the most convenient one is the PubMed query function. So here I've literally taken a query that would go directly into the PubMed advanced search, saved it, and 43 results were found that matched this query. And this query was basically any item that has a Merck-affiliated author that also has the word pembrolizumab in the text, published between 2014 and 2015, and 2016 are the years. And so everything you're seeing here are the results of that search. So as I mentioned, this item, pembrolizumab versus chemotherapy, has a score of 888. It's been mentioned across an incredibly diverse number of sources. It's got a ton of citations, so it's has impact on both the traditional metric side and on our side. All of the news mentions can be clicked on, and this is where you can get a really interesting view into who is engaging and what they're saying. And as you can see, I mean, at the most micro level, we are capturing one tweet from one person one time for millions of items. So you can imagine that the data set here is huge. And as this shows up now on the New England Journal site, if you wanted to do any kind of analysis around this, you would struggle because of the way that they display our data on the one hand, but also because it's one article at a time. It would be a very laborious process to pull together all of the engagement that we've captured. So the nice thing about the Explorer platform is it aggregates all of the attention for all of these items. So we've got, let's see, of the 43 items, there are 34 with attention across 11 sources. So if we aggregate those 33 items and look at them from kind of a 30,000 foot view, we're now looking at the attention they've received over all time. And that falls into 353 news mentions, 34 blog posts, 7 citations and policy documents, 1,700 tweets, so on and so forth. And each of these you can hover over, you can click on, and dive into more detail into what they're saying. We pull out the highlights for you. So those are going to be your news mentions. And again, this is useful view in that you can see the top tier, the heaviest weighted news mentions, which give a score of 10 to the total score. But again, if you wanted to go kind of one at a time here, that would still be a pretty heavy lift. So again, I'll sort of show how we get around that. We provide some pretty compelling demographic information. This is a piece of, this is an enhancement we've rolled out in the last month that's been very driven by feedback from our life sciences customers. So how does Twitter engagement look compared to Facebook? Compared to the news? And in this case, policy actually lights up because this data set does actually have policy mentions. It's worth noting that there's a big kind of asterisk here in the sense that it depends on the therapeutic area. Twitter and Facebook, blogs, and the news have very, very different audiences. And so if you are genuinely interested in who is talking where, you will find that the behaviors on Twitter, for example, versus Facebook are quite different. And the maps, to a certain degree, reflect that. And then, as I said, we are capturing every mention in real time. And that is quite a lot of data, if you can imagine this, doing this for every article out there that we can track. Now, of course, you're maybe not interested in looking at every single one of these one at a time. So you could just type in Twitter and just only show tweets and eliminate all of the other sources that would be that would show up in this feed. You may only be interested in one tweeter. So perhaps Tom Heston is someone that you know typically tweets about oncology research and has a pretty major following. Knowing that this is oncology research, you might say, I just want to see what Tom Heston's doing. And he's been pretty active. If you are familiar with the blog landscape that you're focusing on, you may want to see what they're doing in the news, what they're doing in other places. So you can literally take each source and search for them within this platform. But again, you are still limited by the fact that that's thousands and thousands of mentions. How can you parse them to get something more meaningful? So the first step to this, if you want to treat this next section as a how-to, is to actually export the CSV of the data. And Excel, while it is a many-headed beast in a lot of ways, is actually very useful for this. So when the data set comes out, it basically lands like this. Instead of being sorted by the mention type, so blog post, news outlet, it's actually going to be sorted by, I believe it's date. So I resorted this to produce the view that you're seeing here. But this is the raw data that comes out. You have the kind of engagement, so in this case a blog post, when the mention happened, which becomes very interesting when you're looking kind of longitudinally at how stakeholders are engaging with research. The name of the outlet. You might be wondering about some of these question marks. This is still a kink we're working out with non-Roman alphabets. So anytime someone posts in Japanese or Chinese, Arabic, what the export is showing like this, and that's something we actually need to work on. But it does show up looking the way it should in the platform. The actual name of the mention, if that applies, the URL to go view it. This is a critical component of our data, the fact that you can actually click on the item and read it. The research it's associated with, so in 99% of the cases, it's going to be an article, a journal article. The journal it's from, the date of publication, and then some metadata that we capture, including the DOIs and the PubMed ID. So this is what comes out of the export. And as you can imagine, this, like, you don't need a lot of this to do the kind of analysis. So really all you have to do then to get to that next point is to create a pivot table. And I'm hoping when I say pivot table, that's not immediately causing people to shut down. I know when I first encountered pivot tables, I wanted to run away. But actually they're a lot more, they're a lot easier to use than I expected. And so really all you're doing with the pivot table is you're clicking on mention type, and you're creating a row for that. So blog posts, there are 34 total blog posts, 8 faculty of 1,000 recommendations, so on. And then you want to know, okay, who engaged in each of those source types. So you're literally just clicking on outlet or author, dragging and dropping, and now magically we have the breakout for each source type. Now the challenge with this, right, is they are listed alphabetically. So there's, folks who are engaging a lot, but their stuff is buried because it's showing up alphabetically and not sorted by the highest to the lowest. So to do that, you just go ahead, and I actually went ahead and made different tabs for each one. So I broke them out. And once you make this view, you can highlight it and sort it Z to A. In fact, should I show it to you? Let me show you with the nivolumab view. So here, this is sorted B to A. So you just click the row that you want to sort. You can go smallest to highest. And now we've got the folks who posted in Facebook the least at the top. Or say, actually, no, I want to go highest to lowest, expand the selection, and now you've got your top and the ones highlighted are the top 15 Facebook engagers in the platform. And arguably, these two should be added as well because they also had 2 posts. But that's how you do it in a nutshell. So really all you're doing is using the pivot table builder to input the information that you want. So mention type is a row that you want. Outlet or author is a row that you, that's a row that you want as well. Can't seem to drag and drop here. And if you want to avoid two columns, you can, I guess, get rid of this one. I haven't actually played with this. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so then that way you don't have 2 columns of the same thing. So from there, you're sorting so that you can sort by Z to A. Let's see if this works. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, so we'll go back. I think doing it the way I showed originally, breaking it out by source type, then allows you to do the filtering without messing up the entire pivot table. And then from there, you can drill down to whatever level of detail that you want. So I did this for Pembro. I did this then again for nivolumab. So again, this is the full nivolumab export. It's a mess. Created the pivot table to get this view, and then just gave each source type its own tab just to kind of keep things sane. And then to give myself kind of a baseline, I actually did a export of any article in PubMed that had the keyword nivolumab or pembrolizumab published 2014, 15, or 16. So I just wanted to have something to compare the each drug to as a larger sort of baseline. And same action here, identified my top 15, and then created a comparison document, right? And so the items, these are the top 15 for Pembro, top 15 for Nivo, top 15, any item with either of those words in it for the same time period. And then anything in red has been mentioned in all 3. Anything in orange has been mentioned in 2 of them. And then the items that are in yellow are either just engaged in Facebook for Pembro on Facebook, or just engaged with Nivo on Facebook. This is kind of just, Excel in the weeds here, but broke it out for news, for Twitter, for Facebook, and for blogs. So if we jump back into the slide deck now, this is again the how here. This is the data set from PubMed that I pulled out. Those queries, as I said, were done exactly in the platform. I then broke out by type, right? So top 15, as I just showed you in that sort of alarming spreadsheet. And then I highlighted the ones that you found in all 3. So engaging with the entire data set, engaging just with nivolumab, and engaging just with pembrolizumab. And these are the organizations that are engaging most frequently with those article types. So ASCO Post and BioPortfolio are both companies. Medscape and MedPage Today are like continuing education medical news resources. So they're not just companies who are aggregating news from a lot of different places. They're also bringing a continuing ed component to what they present. eCancer is a nonprofit. Science Daily is an aggregator. And then Medical News Today is just kind of straight up medical news. So the ability to know, okay, these are the places where I should focus, these 8 news outlets. Now I've gone from, 200 news outlets that I'm not really have the time or inclination to investigate. Now I can just investigate 8 of them. And it's very easy to learn about each of these news outlets. All of them have about pages. You can then learn a bit more about what they're doing, who they target, what their reach is, for further determining if you would consider them a digital online leader. Facebook was the same. So again, apologies for the question marks. Those are engagers with non-Roman letters. Facebook is a really interesting platform. The kind of engagement you see there tends to revolve around patients and advocates. Not exclusively. There's quite a few healthcare practitioners who advertise their practices, or not advertise, but promote their practices there. But in this case, there was some interesting overlap. So journals are, and journals that, are high profile are the most frequent engagers here. So NEJM, JAMA Oncology, and JAMA, the flagship, engage the most on Facebook, most likely promoting their own research. I think it's safe to say. I didn't actually look in to see which items they were tweeting or posting on Facebook. But you also see a nice mix of HCPs. There's a patient, and then there's an education group. So Medical Education Consortium is actually a group devoted to, I think they're a nonprofit. They're devoted to continuing ed resources for practitioners. And you saw earlier, I did that search for Tom Heston. He has a Facebook page, a Twitter profile. He's got a big footprint in a number of platforms. He has a really nice bio kind of explaining what he's trying to do with his online presence. And that can be critical in determining how he might be useful to your organization as a DOL. Twitter, same story. Interesting to see who the most frequent folks are. In this case, we have a couple associations or societies, the second one and the second to last one. Flagship Bio and Ablate Cancer are both actually companies. We've got an individual research. We've got bots even. So the bot engagement on Twitter is really interesting. There are, and that is actually, that bot is curated by a researcher. But basically what these bots are doing is they are scraping for relevant literature and then basically providing a real-time feed. So it's a nice way of, if you know that tumors and immuno-oncology are your focus, you can follow that particular handle and be up to date here. But as you can see, the other folks, Mike Thompson, he is an MD PhD. His affiliations are all there, ASH, ASCO. He has some affiliation with Doximity. That is incredibly useful when determining if you want to pursue him as a DOL. So what next? This was, a very superficial sort of analysis, kind of showing what you can do with a couple clicks and a few Excel spreadsheets. If and when you sort of want to go further, there's a lot more to the questions that can be asked. And this is typically what we find when we're doing custom reporting and engagement with, excuse me for 1 second. Custom reporting engagement with companies. These are the kinds of questions they're asking and wanting to understand a bit more about geography, demography, patterns of behavior, patterns of sentiment. Is there stuff that can be data mined? Is there text mining that we could do that could tell us a bit more about how these engagers are influencing in the space that they practice? So there's a lot to dig into here. The value of this data is if the value of this data to you is if digital online leaders matter to you. So that's sort of the bigger meta question you probably have to answer at your organization. There's a lot of ways to get you the data. As I said, we obviously have the platform, which I showed you. We have an API, which many organizations, that's all they're interested in. They want to be able to mine the data. Programmatic access to the raw data is also available. We do a lot of custom reporting. So this visualization you're looking at here, we developed for the National Cancer Institute. And then we do consultancy in conjunction with the other companies within the digital science portfolio. So sometimes customers want to do kind of a level of analysis that we can't solely do in-house. So we partner with our sister companies to generate reports and analysis that leverage the data sets that all the different companies are producing, not just us. So with that, I leave you with one last visualization. We produced this for UCB Pharma. It's looking at therapeutic areas and focusing on the journals that have the most attention with Altmetric versus citations. So I'll keep that in the background. And I will open it up to questions. And we've already got one question, so I'm going to pop that open. Great question from Pier Paolo. So thank you for posing it. The question was, if we're going to allow for the capability to filter by country within the platform. That is definitely a possibility. We need to get more feedback from customers like you as to how you'd like that done. We certainly have it on the back end, which is how we do the maps, but we have to figure out some sort of nuances with some of the other sources. So for example, citations on Wikipedia, comments in Reddit, those typically don't have geographic tags associated with them, so figuring out where they are can be a challenge. The other piece is making sure folks understand the difference between the geographic location of where an account was made versus where somebody was when they made a post, right? So we're not actually tracking the physical location of individuals, but rather where, their sort of country affiliation based on what they're doing. So I hope that answers that. Any other questions from anyone on the line? You can fill in the Q&A box there. All right. Well, my contact information is below. We have recorded this, so we will be sending the recording around. Thank you for your patience with the dog barks and the cars going by. The joys of a virtual home office here. If you have anything else you need, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be doing a couple more of these presentations throughout the fall, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at ISMAP or the MAPS meeting or somewhere down the road in between. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.